in Russia that became Buddhist. And some ancient texts are, I think, still kept in St. Petersburg, I think I've heard. So, that's where you're from? Okay, yes. Both, okay, lovely. Okay, so anyway, therefore, this tradition has spread from China and from Tibet to different countries. All right, and in all these traditions, the Heart Sutra is recited. But there are shorter versions available, for instance, in the Chinese, in the Japanese, and the Korean tradition. The prologue, for instance, is not part of the sutra. And in Tibet, the longer version, which then also spread to other countries, well, it has this prologue. And this prologue has the purpose, and it's not just the Heart Sutra, but other sutras as well. They present the time when it was set forth, the teacher who taught it, the place in which the sutra was given, the audience, and sometimes they add the Dharma that was taught. So actually in Tibetan, it's described an excellent time, an excellent place, an excellent teacher, an excellent audience, and an excellent Dharma. Okay? Right. It's just considered to be, like the place considered to be really good. And it's all about kind of saying, those who wrote it down, saying that the Buddha was so skillful. The Buddha was so skillful when he gave this teaching. He taught it at just the right time, in the right place. So it's kind of like a praise to the Buddha. Okay? Just the right time, right place, right teacher, right? Okay. But this is kind of interesting. Leaving aside this excellency and so forth, I mean, it's a little weird for us, but just saying that, well, the time is important, isn't it? So there are times in our life when we're ready for certain things, and there are other times when we're not. Okay? I mean, if like 10 years ago you heard about Buddhism, you'd be like, right? I don't know. I remember when I first encountered Buddhism when I was in school, but also later on, there wasn't really that interest, you know. I thought, it kind of makes sense, yeah. I remember having that thought, yeah, Four Noble Truth kind of makes sense. Okay, what's next? I'm busy partying, whatever, right? So therefore, a time was then ripe. At some point, I was exactly the right time, and it hit me, and I was like, wow, that's it. So similarly, this is true, of course, for those people who were present there. So there was a certain time that was just the right time to get these teachings. And they had a fully qualified teacher, the Buddha, right? When you read it, it seems like, yeah, well, the Buddha didn't say anything really, except for, well done, well done. That's all he said. But I'll talk more about it. It's still considered to be a teaching of the Buddha. Okay. So, and then the place, well, where was the place? The place was at Vulture's Mess Mountain, or the Mass of Vulture's Mountain. Sometimes it's translated as Vulture Peaks Mountain, because the Sanskrit apparently has both meanings. I'll find it in a moment. But anyway, in Tibetan, the translation of the Mass of Vultures has been taken on. That's got the word pungbo, which kind of means, in this context, mass or heap, a mass of. And so the story is about, well, that's the Vulture's Peak Mountain. I'll say a little bit about the term first, or the name first. But that was, at the time of the Buddha, was considered to be a perfect place for monks and nuns, for beings who wanted to practice the Dharma. Just the environment, the climate, it was very conducive. It was a very spiritual place. It's also still considered to be a sacred place in other traditions, in other Indian ancient traditions. And so being the sacred place, that was seen very conducive for spiritual practice. And it was near this town called Rajgriha, which basically means the residence or the dwelling or whatever of the residence of the king, who at the time was King Bimbisara, who after he moved away from where he lived before, I think it was Kushinagar, where he lived, and his palace had burned down, so he moved his residence to this particular place. And for lay people, that was the place to be. It was a thriving town with everything you needed to, make a living and so forth. So that's why in the text it's also mentioned when it has the prologue, right? It says the Bhagavan was dwelling on Mass Vulture's mountain in Rajgriha. And some say near Rajgriha, because it was not the town of Rajgriha. So it's mentioning both Mass of Vulture's mountain, which was the place for practitioners, and Rajgriha, which was great for those who still followed an ordinary life, but were interested in the teachings and came over to receive them. So it was the perfect place. So, as I said, those was the excellence of the place. And the Buddha, of course, was there. It's mentioned. The Buddha was there, so an excellent teacher. And there was a great kind of audience. Those community of monks, including also nuns, because the word here, monks, I need to explain that in a moment. And then a great community of bodhisattvas. And the Dharma that was taught later. So this was usually done as part of a sutra in the beginning, the time, the place, the teacher, the audience, and the Dharma. Maybe not always the Dharma, but it helped you to understand, oh, this was the particular teaching the Buddha gave, just to identify it. Okay. So it says here, thus did I hear at one time. This is how it starts. Now, who says, who's I here? That's the question. Who's I? Avalokiteshvara? No. 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 Well, there's some debate on that. It's said to be Ananda. Ananda. Ananda is said to be, he was very close to the Buddha. He was also a nephew, I think, of the Buddha and an assistant. And he had great abilities of recalling the teachings of the Buddha, great memory. And when the Buddha's teachings were written down, he, among others, were asked to this council when they got together with the baskets and everything to write things down. And so he would then recite from memory this teaching here, in this case the Heart Sutra, and say, thus have I heard at one time. The Buddha would start this way, thus have I heard at one time. And when I say there's some debate, well, it's actually a sutra of the Nalanda tradition, of the universal vehicle tradition. Whereas Ananda was a follower of the Pali tradition, which is why some commentators say it wasn't Ananda. It was a bodhisattva called Manjushri. I'm not talking about the Buddha of wisdom called Manjushri, but there was actually a person, a disciple of the Buddha, a bodhisattva called Manjushri, who was known for his great wisdom. So some commentators say, thus have I heard, was actually this great bodhisattva Manjushri who was known for his wisdom. Okay, but anyway, someone did it. Someone said it. So whether it was Manjushri, whether it was, okay. So the reason that they say Ananda, it wasn't Ananda, because this is so difficult here, and it's particular later on when it says the Buddha was doing such and such. He was engaged in this meditative equipoise. How would you know? So it would be really difficult. So someone as advanced as a bodhisattva would have a better knowledge of that. But it's still debatable. So it's just something that there's some disagreement on. Never mind. So then it says the Bhagavan, the Buddha. We heard the meaning of the word Bhagavan before, so it's just another word for saying the Buddha, was dwelling on this Mass of Vultures mountain. Now, Mass of Vultures, that's not a particularly beautiful name for a place. Especially, we don't really have an affinity for vultures, right? If I were to ask which bird you want to be, people say, I want to be a falcon or an eagle. Who says I want to be a vulture? But it's interesting, because when I taught this sutra in a different context, I thought there must be something to vultures. I mean, there must be, there must be something special about vultures. And so I did a little bit of research, and I found out vultures are very important for the Indian ecosystem. In fact, some Indian biologists say that the decrease in vultures has led to the increase in rabies. Because vultures, well, first of all, they have a very acidic stomach. So therefore, viruses, bacteria that come from decomposed material doesn't affect them. And they can actually sense a dead animal before it decomposes. Which means before it becomes actually poisonous, they already devour it, and therefore there's less danger. So they're actually cleaning the environment. And they release, when they eat any kind of, decomposed material or any kind of dead material, they release some acid from their feet, which sterilizes not just their own body, but also the environment. They're very important. They're very clean animals, very important for the ecosystem, and get very little credit. Because they're not, beauty queens as such. I mean, they don't look exactly very attractive, and since they live on the dead, it's not. But actually, I thought, this is really a bodhisattva. Doesn't need to get the credit. Doesn't need to get, just do what's necessary to do, and it's so important. Help beings to avoid, well, first of all, disease, right? I thought that's beautiful. So they didn't have to be proud eagles soaring the sky and being admired. No, they're right there taking care of business, right? So then I thought, it makes sense, the vultures, okay. So in that place, well, there are different reasons for calling it Vulture's Mess Mountain. There is one an interpretation. It says that it looks like that the place itself, and I guess that was 2,600 years ago after a few earthquakes, etc., the place has probably changed its shape. But some would say it looks like a flock of vultures. Some say it looks like the head of a vulture, that particular hill. And some say it looks like a sitting vulture with its wings folded. I mean, it can't be all of them, and I don't know where you stand to actually see it that way, but that's how it goes. But others say that a lot of bodhisattvas, they manifested in the form of vultures. So there's the Buddha, and there are all these vultures in the Buddha's teaching, right? But as I said, manifesting in different forms, which seems like a fairy tale to us right now, as we go on, hopefully it makes more sense how the physical and the mental are closely related, and manifesting in a certain form is not as far-fetched as it may seem right now. Anyway, going back to the name, therefore, somehow, I said early on, some people interpreted this place to mean Vulture Peak Mountain, so that would account for this idea that the peak looked like a vulture, or it looked like a flock of vultures. And then the other account would be of a mass of vultures appearing there, and therefore it's called Vulture Mess Mountain, or the Mass of Vultures Mountain. But the Tibetan translators chose the translation of Mass of Vultures Mountain. Although I've seen translations in English, although the Tibetan suggests mass, I've seen Vulture Peaks Mountain as well. So maybe the translators then relied on the Sanskrit version, this particular interpretation of the Sanskrit. Anyway, I'm just sharing this with you. It's not a big deal, but might as well get a fuller sense of how difficult it is to translate a text, because there are different ways of looking at it. Okay. Anyway, so the Bhagavan, the Buddha, was dwelling on mountain in Rajagriha or near Rajagriha, whichever way you want to put it, together. Tapchikdu in Tibetan. So there's other words for the Tibetan word together. So here the word apparently implies that they got along with each other really well. Harmoniously, they were together there. That's what the commentaries say. It's like they got along really well. And that's not easy. Okay? So when we talk about what's called the spiritual community, the Sangha, this is true. That was true then, and it's true nowadays. So nowadays, in the West, for instance, or in modern Buddhist communities, you have less monasteries and nunneries, you have more Buddhist centers. And the people who come together, they usually share one thing, interest in the Dharma, but not necessarily anything else. They don't listen to the same music, they may not necessarily dress the same way, come from the same, cultural background. So people are thrown together from all wakes of life, and they don't necessarily get along. And it's the perfect ground for practicing patience, right? Yes. So oftentimes people have this idea, when I come to a Buddhist center, there's nirvana the moment I open the door, the gates of the Buddhist center, and there's nirvana, and I don't need to do anything, I just need to enjoy it. And it'll be silent and perfect. Well, no. As you probably know, from your smiles I can see, no, it's not true. Of course not. I mean, nirvana is a mental state. It's not a place. We had a restaurant, it's gone now, it's called Kana Nirvana. Nirvana food, but it's long gone. So nirvana is gone from the cloud conscious realm. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, is it still there? No, I don't think so. Anyway, the point is that monasteries and nunneries, they also have their conflicts. It's not easy to live in a monastery or a nunnery. I mean, being put together, sometimes 2 or 3 to a room, crammed together. And again, you're not relatives, and even if you're relatives don't always get along. And then going through these strict disciplines and sharing your day and going together through classes and so forth. So that's not easy. But it's the perfect opportunity to practice patience, because without obnoxious people, how are you going to practice patience? So it seemed to be as a good thing. And Dharma practice has its hardships. I mean, if you do anything else, I mean, going to a gym, right? What kind of weights are you going to choose? 2 gram? Done. Oh, that was fun, right? It's not like that. You're going to choose the heavy weights. Okay, you don't want to overdo it, but you choose weights that help you to grow your muscles. I mean, I'm sorry for using these examples, but the ideas are the same. I mean, it seems like a gym and a Buddhist monastery, okay, not exactly, but there are similarities. So we choose, if we want to work out, if we want to get a certain body, build our body in a certain way, we need hardships. There's no way, no other way. So we choose hardship. There's temporary hardship for long-term benefit. Well, Dharma practice is just like that. Our mind is just like a stiff, untrained body. Okay? So our body right now, you've got an escalator and you've got stairs. What are you going to choose? Escalator. Right? We just try to avoid hardship. That's just our tendency. They say in the old days that's natural, because when we were living in caves, instead of choosing to climb over the trees, we chose to go around it. So we still have that tendency to preserve our strength, right? That's what I read once. That's why we don't really want to exercise. Whatever is the reason, I don't know whether that's the reason. But the point is, it's healthier, definitely, to make an effort, to work hard. Well, that's the same for our mind. If we just go along our tendencies of afflictions and so forth, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So we need to accept some hardships. And going into a Buddhist center, living in a Buddhist monastery, it's going to be really hard, but it's worth it. It's going to be hard. So don't expect nirvana in the... Okay. So here, when it says together with a great community, it's saying they managed to live harmoniously with each other. And I see it every day in the nunnery that I live. They're not always agreeing with each other. They don't always agree, but they make it work. They're frustrated sometimes, but then they think, okay, that's just the life in the community, and they never take it outside, so you never hear about it. They never take it outside, right? No, it's their business. It's like in the family. You don't necessarily carry it outside. So, and then you work with each other. And there are more difficult times and there are easier times, but it's all your practice ground, right? Being with people who are of a different opinion, who you may find obnoxious, and they may find you obnoxious, well, great practice and patience. Okay, but I just want to stress this, so especially with respect to the word together, how they managed here harmoniously to stay together. With a great community of monks, it says. Okay, monks here, in the commentaries they say it doesn't literally mean monks. it means arhats. It means liberated beings. So also liberated beings who now interested in following the universal vehicle, they were present. But some would say no, it actually refers to monks and nuns and lay people as well. So I guess different interpretations. Here the word for monk that is used is bhikshu. Bhikshu is the Sanskrit word. Gelong is the Tibetan word. So bhikshu, it derives from the verbal root bhaj and means to divide or share. And it's sometimes described as someone who wants to be shared, like a bhikkhu, so there for others, to be shared, to be there for others, to be, to be shared by others in the sense of sharing his wisdom, for instance. And then, of course, you could apply it to a nun, a bhikshuni. So in that sense, if you apply it to monks and nuns, that works. But also if you apply it to liberated beings, again, they're there for others. They have this compassion for all sentient beings. They want to be there for all sentient beings, and therefore that would make sense as well. The Tibetan word instead for a fully ordained monk, or for bhikshu, or in this context it would then be an arhat, is someone who seeks virtue. Gelong, like ge means virtue, long means to seek in this context, maybe to generate as well. So that's the meaning of these, as it's translated here as monks. So great community. The word for community here is spiritual community. It's the word sangha in Tibetan, gendun. The Tibetan word for sangha is gendun, those aspiring to virtue. So it's spiritual community. And a great community of bodhisattvas. So, okay, therefore, we have arhats and we have bodhisattvas coming together here to receive the teachings. And implied in that, monks and nuns. So just these few words tell us the following. At one time, the person was present who recollected, who recalled this sutra. It was said to be at that time. So one time has different meanings. It can apply to the actual time. And here there's some disagreements. Some say it was a year after Buddha's enlightenment. A great contemporary master called Samdo Rinpoche said it was 13 to 14 years after the enlightenment of the Buddha. In some commentary says it was at the time when Buddha was 57, 58, so about 20 years after the enlightenment of the Buddha. I don't know, sometime after he had become enlightened and after he had taught the first wheel. So we don't exactly know when it was, but the time, it's basically implied that after he had turned the wheel, after he had become enlightened, after he had turned the first wheel, at that time he gave that teaching. That is one interpretation of the word "at one time." Another interpretation is that the person who says, "Thus did I once," or "Thus did I hear at one time," whether it was Ananda or Manjushri, understood at one time what the Buddha taught. At one time, simultaneous, I mean, the moment the Buddha talked, right away, the moment the teachings were given, immediately understood. That is one interpretation as well. I don't know. So I had this mental capacity that at one time he understood. And the third is at a time when people's minds were ripe, this teaching was given. Anyway, so that is the time. The time is given, the Buddha as the teacher is given, the place, Masavalcha mountain near Rajgriha, and then the community of monks and great bodhisattvas. Okay, so in short, in other words, that was the perfect time. I was there. So the great Buddha was there. He was an amazing teacher. Everyone was very harmoniously there together, got along with each other, great audience, great teachings. Everyone was happy. In a way, that's what these few lines say. Okay, so I have already some sense of what's going on. We already have a sense of what to expect. All right. Now, the next part then is called the uncommon prologue. The next part is, at that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Okay, we're already diving into emptiness. That is the uncommon prologue. Uncommon in the sense, the first part, the common prologue, it's pretty obvious, right? If you were there, you knew. Buddha was there, the time, you knew the time, the place, you knew the audience, so it's obvious, the common prologue. Now it's the uncommon prologue, because it's not obvious. Okay, you see the Bhagavan, you see the Buddha, what exactly he's doing, that he's absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception, no idea. He's just sitting there, right? Radiating, but still, I don't know what he's doing. And then there's the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, who's also reflecting on emptiness, on the ultimate nature of phenomena. No idea. How do I know? So it's uncommon. Okay. So first, at that time, that same time as said before, so again the same time in terms of maturity of sentient beings' minds, the time when the Buddha had become enlightened, had taught the first wheel of Dharma, or had turned the wheel of Dharma. Well, then at that point, the Bhagavan, again, another word for the Buddha, he was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena, sometimes also described as the diversity of phenomena. So in some translations, it doesn't say the categories, but it says the diversities of phenomena. And what was that meditative absorption? Well, it was called the profound perception or profound appearance. That's what it literally says in Tibetan. Profound appearance or profound illumination. Sometimes it's translated that way. Now that was a concentration that only the Buddha could have. In the sense that when we understand the ultimate nature of phenomena, our mind can do this, even without becoming a Buddha. You can understand the ultimate nature of phenomena. You can. You can directly experience it. But when you experience the ultimate nature of all phenomena, you cannot experience anything else with that same mind. In that moment, only emptiness appears to your mind. When you directly experience it, nothing else can appear to your mind. Our mind is restricted, is limited, in that sense that you cannot, for instance, know the actually existent I, on one hand, the I that does exist, and the emptiness of the I. Which takes me to one thing that's important, and that is very confusing in Buddhism. That we talk about selflessness and say there's a self. Very confusing. We talk about, so people when they hear about it, they often ask me, like when they first come to Buddhism, you talked about selflessness. By the way, selflessness means something actually quite different in English. Selflessness means altruism, right? He's a very selfless person. Actually means altruism. Okay, so the translators took this word, selflessness, and gave it a different meaning. Okay, selflessness, as in like there's no self. Because that's what the Tibetan and that's what the Sanskrit word connotes. No self. Okay, selflessness, no self. But then there is a self. I keep saying I did, you did. So I'm doing things and I'm saying there's no self. So there's no self, but there's an I? No, 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 no. It's that needs to be specified, needs to be explained. That of course there's a self. Of course there's an I. There's me and there's you. Otherwise, who becomes enlightened? Right? Who's meditating? It wouldn't make sense. There is a self. There's an existent self. But as I said earlier on, what we do is we exaggerate the way the self exists. We give it a mode of existence on top of what's actually there that is not realistic. We make up this attribute. Our mind makes up this attribute of the self, of existing in a very concrete, independent way. So on top of what's there, based on what's there, we add to it. Does that make sense? Which accounts, therefore, for the fact that there is an existent self. Of course there is. But we exaggerate the existence of that. So that exaggerated attribute that our mind wrongly designates, that our mind wrongly imputes on the object, that it wrongly perceives, that needs to be negated. And that absence of that unrealistic self is called selflessness. But I know it's confusing in English. It's just as confusing in Tibetan. So it needs to be explained. And I'm wondering, why is it done that way? Probably, I mean, definitely on purpose. It's not like, oh, that was an accident, but now we can't change it. I don't think it was done. It was not an accident. They were very aware of that, because you have to pay close attention. What is it that exists and what doesn't? And because the word is confusing, you need to really dig deeper, not to be too confused, right? And pay special attention. So that is the self that exists, and that is the self that doesn't. So don't forget, there is a self that exists. You exist, I exist. But the way it exists, we just can't perceive it, because we're so used to exaggerating the way it does exist. I mean, think of examples like a rainbow, right? Like a rainbow. Or think of the sun rising in the east. It appears to be like actually coming up there. And we reinforce this sense, oh, it's rising. Oh, look, the sun is rising. We know it's not rising, but it appears to us, right? It appears to rise. And in this case, at least, we perceive it with our sense consciousnesses, we perceive it, but we know it's not true. Or other optical illusions, like a rainbow. Right? It's a rainbow, it seems so solid. Oh, look at this beautiful rainbow going from this mountain to the next, or from the mountain to the valley. It seems to be so solid, but it isn't. Right? It appears that way. We may perceive it that way. So similarly, the eye or other phenomena, similar to the appearance of the rainbow, similar to the appearance of a dream, for instance. In a dream, it seems so solid. You wake up and it's like, whoa, it's like you want to tell someone what just happened. It's the most boring thing in the world to listen to someone else's dreams. But I know I want to talk about it, because I was like, wow, what I just experienced. Right? It's just in my mind. It felt so real. It felt so solid. The dream was there, of course, but considering that dream to be reality, that is the mistake. So of course the dream is there, but then we exaggerate. In the dream, we perceive it to be a real event that takes place in my room. An elephant came to my room, right? I'm dreaming I'm in my room, there's this elephant. It never happened. So there is the dream, of course, the appearance, but my mind creates something extra. Now, it's easy with the dream. It's relatively easy. You just need to wake up. It's easy with the rainbow and with what is it? What was the other example I used? The sunrise. It's now easy. It's now easy. 500 years ago there wasn't, right? But the point is, nowadays we know this. But the self, it's a little harder. It's more difficult, actually, because it's not as easy to find out how we are mistaken. But it's a similar idea. So the self does exist. The table exists. You exist. I exist. But not in the way we perceive it to exist, with this extra quality of existing inherently, as it's described. Like, inherently, it's not a good word. No, it is a good word in a way, but it's difficult when we hear about it. Inherently? What does that even mean? How often do you use the word inherently in your daily life? Right? We don't use it that much. Water is inherently wet. But we don't need to say that because people know. So inherently means naturally, actually, by way of its nature. But what it actually means is that this table is naturally a table. It's got that tableness written all over. You don't need anything else for it to be a table. It just is a table, right? That's how it feels. But who made it a table? Is it a table for everyone? Is it a table for a fish? No, a fish would never go, oh, there's a table over there, right? So for a fish, it's not a table. For a dog, it's probably not a table. It's more like a bed or something, or whatever, right? Or a place they can lie down. I mean, a bed, like, yeah, a place where they can just lie down or whatever. So the point being that it seems that I call this a table because it is already a table. I have the thought table because it is a table. Whereas in actuality, it is a table because I think it's a table. Right? Because I think table. Otherwise, it from its own side, a piece of wood and a bit of glue and and some nails, right? So what makes it a table? Does that make sense? So we have a sense, there's this objective world out there. To give you an extreme example, we even think there's objective beauty. We do say clever things like, oh, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, right? And then when someone wears some weird stuff, they're like, oh, they got a weird taste. Wow, they wear funny stuff. How they design their room, they've really got a bad taste. What is bad taste? Right? Bad taste. Well, I consider it to be, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder? Yeah, but my eyes are the ones that see things from, they see what's really beautiful. They just get it wrong. Right? We think it's really ugly and like, how can they do that? It all comes from a sense there's this objective beauty. Okay? So this is an exaggerated version of that. But again, as if beauty was within the object. It's so interesting when you learn why we like certain features of our body. Because biologically, well, in the woman, they suggest they have the right childbearing body, right? Wide hips, well, conducive for childbearing, and then we find that attractive, right? And it's so funny, because living with Tibetans in the West, our obsession with breasts, they don't have that. Women in Tibet, they just took off their tops and they washed in the morning. Breasts were like milk bags, right? I mean, they were like food bags. I mean, you fed your children and nothing else. And sometimes they're in the way, but okay, but you took off it was not a big deal. Breasts were not a big deal. They were not seen. So now our obsession with breasts. So we consider them beautiful or not. It wasn't like that in Tibet, for instance, right? And so the nuns, they still reflect that, they're so, they don't understand this obsession that's going on in the West. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's all coming from our mind. These objects we perceive that we believe are out there and everyone sees the same, that is part of our misperception. In fact, none of us see the same. You right now see something that I've never seen. You see something right now I've never seen. My own face. The image in the mirror is not my face. It's just a reflection of my face, right? So I've never seen my own face. My nose is long enough I can actually see my nose, right? But that's all I can see. And I see something you've never seen. Your own face, right? So just to give you an example. So just from that, this is a very simplified way to look at it. But we believe there's an objective world, whereas in actuality, we all perceive something different. And right now, if you all see my face, well, you all see it from a slightly different perspective. And who knows, the colors you perceive are the same. Maybe your green is my blue. And you all know the story of do you know the story of the BBC dress? Have you heard of the BBC dress? Okay, some of you have heard of it. It's really interesting. It's how our brain is wired. On the BBC, it became popular on the BBC. There was a British lady, and she had she was getting married, and her mum had chosen a dress for the marriage, and she sent her a picture, and he said, "Look, I've chosen this white golden dress. What do you think?" And the daughter is like, "It's not white golden, it's blue black." And she's like, "What?" So they looked at this picture, and it turned out that because of our brain, that half of human population sees it as white golden, and the rest sees it as black and blue. I'm white golden, by the way. And I sat with other people in a restaurant once with one of our teachers and some of his students, and we just came up with this idea of the BBC dress. So we shared this picture, And so it was like, it's blue black. And I'm like, no, it's white golden. And we were all, split into half on, kind of roughly half, on what color it's got. So that shows, this is one example, that we don't perceive the same colors. And that is just that one dress. So again, who knows? We all called it red, but what you see is actually my blue. And we both called it red. Right? Isn't that interesting? So that takes us already a little bit away from how could it be objectively? How could there be this objective world? But if you dig deeper, if you check your own mind, it seems like, yeah, you go in the same room. Don't you see it? And since they agree, you feel, oh yeah, they're all, right? But you don't know what they see. But then, everything we see with our sense consciousnesses are very much influenced. Oh, thank you. The prayers?
Should I give to everyone or?
Pardon?
I have the dedications.
Oh, great. Yes.
Give them
Okay.
to everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, later. Okay, great. So therefore, on top of our sense perception, which already is individually very different, on top of that, there's our mental consciousness, which is so different. I mean, growing up in a different culture, just that accounts for seeing the world in a very different way. And possibly also, of course, the tastes we like, the smells we like, the shapes and colors we like, the music we like, right? The first Hindi song I listened to, I was like, huh? And I really like it. Right? Yeah, I got used to it, so now I really like it. So the thing is, or Tibetan song for that matter, Tibetan songs, they're all the same, right? So anyway, the point being, it changes, right? And my sense perception has changed. My reaction to a Hindi song is very different now. So, or a Tibetan song. Okay, now therefore, it seems as if there is this objective world with things being what they appear to us, and it's got nothing to do with me. I'm just, my mind is just a looking glass into the world. That's how it seems. No, our mind is the creator of your world. Your mind is the creator of your own world. Reality is created by our own thoughts. Right? It doesn't seem that way. It does not seem that way. Not at all. The I is a creation of my own thoughts, right? My mind says I in relation to everything that's close to my mind, including my body. But I'm actually you. From your perspective, from the perspective of your mind, I'm you. I'm you. I'm the other. I'm the less important. So what makes my mind think I'm more important than you are? What gives me the right? Just because my mind has given that given that label I on the basis of what is closest to it, I make this the center of the universe. It wouldn't be so bad if you didn't do that. But everyone does it. So we end up with a lot of centers of the universe who don't agree on who's the center. And that's why there's a lot of conflict, right? So it all makes sense, doesn't it? So, therefore, we need to understand that that characteristic of existing independently, of existing naturally within the object, existing inherently as table, inherently as beauty, inherently as this, that, and the other, that's not true. That it lacks that quality. It lacks that quality. And that is called emptiness. That lack of that quality is called emptiness because phenomena are empty of that quality. Now, the word empty is very difficult for us as well. Empty. We don't talk like that. I'm empty of being a cow. It's just another way of saying I'm not a cow, right? But in the Tibetan language, when you're actually saying I am not a cow, in the philosophical language, you use this word, I am empty of being a cow. I don't exist objectively. So you say, I'm empty of existing objectively. That's just not a way we're used to. We don't talk like that. But we took it on from the Tibetan because you need a noun to describe that state of being empty, which is emptiness, which doesn't have a good connotation in English, right? Emptiness is not a nice word. Oh, I'm experiencing so much emptiness. My life is so empty, right? It's got a negative connotation. It's not a good word. So especially native English speakers, when they hear the word emptiness, they go, ooh, first. They don't really like it. Okay? And then if you translate it into your respective language, you probably have a similar word that connotes kind of meaninglessness and sadness and so forth. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? So, therefore, what I'm trying to say here as part of the sutra still, the Buddha at the time when that sutra was spoken, or when that sutra took place, was absorbed in that meditative backward poise, that was such that phenomena still appeared. The diversity, the categories of everything that existed appeared, but at the same time, he had that profound understanding of their emptiness, the profound perception or the profound appearance. Okay, so this description is interpreted in different ways, but everyone agrees that the Buddha was able to see the actual nature of phenomena and still see phenomena at the same time, which we can't do. Either we perceive the self that exists, right, affected by, of course, by the appearance of inherent existence, or we understand that the lack of inherent existence of the I, but the I or the self cannot appear in that moment. Only the emptiness can appear. So our mind is limited in that way, but that limitation can, of course, be removed. Okay? So when you come to understand what we're negating, and you start meditating, and you come to understand it's not there. It's a bit like the meditations, they make you look under the bed to check for the monster. So you go through, try to find it. It's a bit like you're looking underneath the bed. Oh, it's not there. It's not there. So this moment when you have it's not there, only this absence of the monster appears. Not the bed, not the empty space. It can't, I mean, if that was emptiness. It's in the case of the bed, you can still do that because it's not that difficult to understand. But when you take to mind the emptiness of the table, for instance, the table no longer appears. It cannot appear. It cannot appear because of the absence of its inherent existence. Why? Why can it not appear? Because when it appears, when the table appears, it appears as inherently existent. But right now, what appears to you is the non-inherent existence of the table. So it cannot appear as inherently existent and non-inherently existent at the same time. It can only be one of the two. It's contradictory. Right? Because to our mind, it always appears to appear inherently. To a Buddha's mind, it doesn't appear that way. The Buddha's mind, everything appears the way it exists. Phenomena appear the way they exist. Their minds are not. So when the Buddha looks at a rainbow, it doesn't appear as something solid. When the Buddha's mind looks at what was the other example? An echo, it doesn't appear as the voice. A reflection in a face doesn't appear as a face. Right? The Buddha knows, knows, and the appearance is not there because the mind is not limited as our mind is. So optical illusions don't exist for a Buddha. A Buddha knows how it appears to us, but to Buddha's mind it doesn't appear that way. Okay? And that is difficult to grasp. That's like trying to understand the mind of a professor when you're a 5-year-old kindergarten student. Very difficult to grasp, right? So beyond us. When you were 5 years old, did you understand the mind of your teachers? No way. It was totally beyond us. So right now, our mind, because of our misperception, is like a mind of a kindergarten student who has the potential to become like this professor, but we have a really hard time to get a sense of what the Buddha can perceive. So beyond us. Right? And we will never really know unless we become the professor, then we really know. But we can develop a sense of it, which is necessary to strive towards it. I want to be like that. I can get what it's like. I can get some rough sense. And of course, the closer you move to it, the more and more it makes sense what the Buddha's mind is. But what it's saying here is that the Buddha's mind is absorbed in that profound appearance in that phenomena still appear, the diversity of phenomena appear, they're actually known by that mind. And at the same time, their actual mode of existence likewise appears and is likewise known. Both truth, the ultimate, which is the emptiness, and the conventional, the ordinary appearances, they're still there. Those are called the true truth. The conventional truth, which is the conventional, what we label on a daily basis, all the things that appear to us, table, cars, I, others, and so forth. And their actual nature of phenomena, the actual nature of lacking intrinsic, independent, objective existence. And that's what the Buddha perceives. So why are we told this? Because this shows us he's the teacher to rely on. Because we can't do that. So someone who can see both sides simultaneously can understand how we are thinking, can understand how phenomena really exist, and teach us how to get there. Right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Now, we'll have time for meditation, but I want to take some questions now. So before we do a little meditation, what I'll ask you to do in the meditation, we'll start with emptiness now. So please, if you have the time, this is an introduction to emptiness and what's called dependent arising. Because the Heart Sutra, to understand the Heart Sutra, we really need to go into emptiness. So this material I prepared actually for a different text. The drawings in here, I started using some illustrations because I think it's a little bit easier. They're actually in color. Pardon? Is there another copy? Oh, you can have my copy actually, because I have it on the tablet. Oh, okay, there's another one as well. Would you like? Yeah, sure, you can have it. And then I think Venerable Droga has also another copy. If someone else needs a copy, she's got another spare copy. No, for now. Okay. All right. Okay, then I'll take it. Great. Yes, so if you're interested in the original, it's just too expensive to make colored copies. And so therefore it's a black and white copy. But maybe with the color, it's even easier to see. So you could leave us a contact or something, and maybe there's a way to send it on to everyone. Should be easy, right? Anyway, so there's some illustrations, and hopefully they help a little bit. Let me check. Yes. So this actually is a short summary of emptiness and dependent arising. And then you have this other handout already from yesterday. If you read the description on the top, it hopefully gives you a sense of how our sense of identity comes to be. And how we feel, it's got nothing to do with this, that, and the other. And it doesn't feel as if it was merely labeled, but this is truly who I am. Right? Okay, so we go through this. Just in preparation, it may be good to look at it first. So in the meditation, and before, let me see whether we got time to do some questions. So what I would like you to do, I'll ask you to find yourself, right? So where are you going to look for yourself? Outside? No, I mean, obviously within the body. It's pretty obvious. So I just ask you to sweep through the body and find the self. It's just a little exercise. Get a sense of yourself. I'll ask you to remember a time when there was this very strong sense, I, and find it, right? This thing that controls us, that, right? If to our mind it seems very real, it seems very concrete. I don't want my success, my body, my mind. Where's that owner? Where's that important I? Let's look for it. Very simple exercise. If it existed as clearly as it appeared, it shouldn't be too hard to find it. You know, this pen appears quite clearly. If I ask you, where is it? Well, you tell me it's on the table, it's here or there. So in the same way as the eye appears, and seems to be much more important than this pen, let's look for it, okay? So, but let me just make sure I'll let you go in time. 6 classes over. 5:30 we have to start the class, the meditation. So we have time, 10 minutes for questions? 10 minutes for questions, is that okay? 20 minutes to take a break? Will that be enough? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, you go. You were the one, you had one more question left.
Actually, I have 3 3 questions now.
Now only one. Now only one.
So
Keep it short.
I,
Can you do?
I will actually ask a different question.
That's totally up to you.
So just before in the class, you.
I'll repeat the question.
Okay. Just before the class, you told us that self doesn't exist, but not in the way we perceive to exist. So I do have 2 other statements. I need help in connecting them.
Okay, please.
So the other statement is that in actuality there is no enlightened beings.
Okay.
There is only enlightened actions.
Okay. All right.
That is second statement. And third statement is that there is no given, giver, and receiver.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So in the second statement, their action is given preference, that there is no enlightened beings.
But there's actions.
But in the third statement, there is nothing. There is no giver.
No receiver and no object to be given. Okay.
So is it? Does it relate to the 3 teachings on mind only, Vaibhashika, Sadhantrika, and Madhyamika?
Okay. Well, the question is he has 3 statements. So the first statement, remind me, the first statement is
Self does exist.
Does exist, but not in the way we perceive it. Okay, so self exists, but not in the way we perceive it. The second statement is there's no enlightened being, but there are enlightened actions.
Only enlightened action.
They're only enlightened action. There's no enlightened being. And the third statement is there is no giver. In the case of giving something, there's no giver, no receiver, and no object to be given. Okay, does that relate? So would you agree or not? What do you think? Right? I'm not saying, I mean, this is something we can figure out all together. What do you think? The self exists, but not the way it appears. Does anyone disagree? The self exists, but not the way it appears. Not in the way in which it appears.
The way we think it appears, but it appears the way it appears.
In a way, okay, does it appear correctly?
Depends on your view.
The correct view. Are you saying everything is totally subjective? So there is...
Like in truth, I would say it appears that it appears because you cannot deny it and it doesn't need to defend itself. It just is.
Okay, it just is. So you're saying because it appears in a certain way, it is. So what about the sun rising in the east? It's a correct appearance. Would you say that? Because it appears to me? Difficult to say.
I don't know.
Right, okay, all right. So here, his view is kind of like, as long as it appears, it makes it such, right? In a certain way, you're saying just as long as it appears,
Like how something appears doesn't make it not true, but it doesn't make, like a physical appearance doesn't have to be a mental appearance or a spiritual appearance. It's all appearance, but it's on a different layer of reality in a different realm.
Okay,
So
it's on
you
a
can
different
view
layer.
it on all different planes.
Okay, so you're saying there's different ways to view the different planes of existence, so you can't necessarily compare these different planes of existence because it's from a physical perspective, from a spiritual perspective. Okay, so he's just making it a little bit more complicated. Just keep it in mind. It's all food for thought. It's good, right? What about, let me just go back to his first statement, right? So the self exists, but not in the way in which it appears. So you would disagree, right?
Difficult to say.
Difficult to say. That's good enough. Okay.
I feel very sure in that.
Very good. You shouldn't feel sure just because I say so, or the Heart Sutra says so. Good to keep the skepticism. So keep exploring, keep investigating. But anyone else on that first statement? Someone else? Then Ram, just a sec.
Yeah, sure.
First, anyone else on that? No. Ram?
I feel that all these make sense. They are perfectly right.
Okay.
But like in the teachings, like Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana,
Okay.
they are at different levels.
There are different levels.
There are
Okay.
different way of putting the same thing.
Okay, there are different levels. But actually, whether Theravada, whether Mahayana, whether, I mean, the emptiness is the same. It may be explained differently, but actually, what we need to realize to become liberated or fully enlightened is the same natural reality from a Buddhist point of view. So, what do you think is the Buddhist view? Before I hear your opinion, what do you think is the Buddhist view on that first statement? The self exists, but not the way it appears. What is the Buddhist view? It's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the Buddhist view is that. Your personal view, well, let's see, right? It's good to be skeptical and be open. The second one, there's no enlightened being, there's only enlightened activity. Would you agree? Do you think Buddhists agree? Do you think, from a Buddhist point of view, that's true? Yes.
I think maybe Buddhists would agree with there are no enlightened beings.
There are no enlightened beings? Okay, so what makes you think there are no enlightened beings? What's your name?
Kyle,
Kyle. Is there Kyle? Does Kyle exist?
not inherently.
Not inherently, but does he exist? Not inherently, I totally agree. But does he exist in general?
Sure.
Sure. Does an enlightened being exist? Non-enlightened beings? I mean, of course, non-inherent beings. I mean, inherently, no. We agreed. There's no inherent Kyle and there's no inherent enlightened being. But if there's Kyle, the next question is there an enlightened being? Assuming that enlightenment is possible.
I guess the way I think about it, it's weird to say that there is, because in this state of enlightenment, there is no the being. There's no like attachment to form. at that point.
Okay, so Kyle is saying, well, it's probably different because Kyle, as we do by itself, we have attachment to our mind and body, and the enlightened being doesn't. So if there's no attachment, the enlightened being is gone.
But what if the attachment is to light? Like the being is the light. So the identity of the self is pure light.
Light?
Yeah, light.
Light?
Like this manifestation is also light. It appears to be physical.
It appears to be
so
solid.
Solid.
But in
it is
actuality...
light. It's like light reflected on darkness, so you can see it.
Okay, now we're talking about the body, right? But what about an enlightened being? I mean, what is enlightened, the mind or the body? The mind, right? So, we talk about an enlightened being independent on the mind, right? Don't we talk about an enlightened being on the basis of having an enlightened mind? So, if I can say there's an unenlightened Kelsang Wangmo, which is my Tibetan name, so Kelsang Wangmo, an unenlightened Kelsang Wangmo, couldn't there also be an enlightened Buddha? Let's assume enlightenment is possible, of course. We could still doubt that. So couldn't there be an enlightened Buddha? Right? On the basis of a certain mind. Of course, the body not being solid, I would wholly agree just on the fact that it's made of subtle atoms where there's more space, actually, than solid matter. I mean, we know nowadays that an atom consists mainly of space. There's more space than there's actual physical substance, and so therefore we're more space than we are like solid matter, but it appears to be very solid.
But also the thing that continues when we pass on, like when we die.
Yes.
What
continues?
Is it not a form of light that continues to travel onwards, if it's in a body or not in a body?
What travels from one life to the next? Of course, that's an interesting question. It takes away a little bit from the body, because we have a certain body in one life, and then we continue, from our mind continues, but it's not light. It's said to be energy. There's a certain energy, but it's not described as light as such, but it's an energy that goes along with the subtle mind, and that continues on. It connects with a new form, which grows into the body of a new being. And then when that life is over again, so that is the Buddha's process. or the Buddhist idea. That is the Buddhist idea of this process of incarnation. But I still want to get back to that statement. He's saying there's no enlightened being, there's only enlightened activity, right?
Where does these statements coming from?
Where are these statements coming
It's
from?
not like it's not a Buddhist
Statement.
right?
Is it a who?
It is a
Sure,
Buddhist
I've never heard
statement.
it.
It's a Buddhist statement.
As I heard it from a teacher.
Who was the teacher?
So I don't remember her name, but it was on Facebook, so I just.
Well, fair enough.
It's an actual.
You found it on Facebook. Okay.
Zen tradition.
It's from the Zen tradition. No, fair enough. I mean, why not? There are these statements and we need to look at them, right? Fair enough. And there's no giver. Oh, okay, now I know where there's no giver. There's no I, no ear, no nose, right? There's no I, no ear, no nose. It's also in there as well, in the Heart Sutra.
statement was from Mahayana tradition, actually.
Yes. This is also a Mahayana Sutra. There's no I, no ear, no nose. There's no form, no feeling, no, it's right? No. Okay, all right. Well, what do you think? When it says there's no, yes.
Becoming. The concept of becoming.
The concept of becoming.
Becoming. So beings, when they become the activity, there is no being.
When they become the activity. So you can become the activity. Is it no longer your activity? Is it no longer a Buddha's activity? Because if you say there is no Buddha, there's no Buddha's activity.
Activity himself, becoming the activity, being is dissolved into the activity.
The being dissolving. Are you also dissolving into your activity?
Yeah, it's becoming.
Are you becoming your activity?
Yeah, in that sense.
In that sense?
Only the activity.
Sorry, this is the mind that debates. You know, we're so like, you use this word. You can't chicken out with this word. In that, what did you use? In that sense. Okay, what does that mean? In that sense, really or not? Right? In which sense? I know it's difficult. It's so much easier to debate than to in this situation,
It's
especially.
like two dualistic, like table
Duality.
without table doesn't exist without the parts. So
That's very good.
enlightened activity.
Oh, that's very good.
without-
Oh, look what he says. He gave this. There would not be couldn't be a table without its parts. Very true. So there couldn't be an enlightened being without the enlightened activities. That's so true. What's your name?
Santosh.
Santosh. There couldn't be a Santosh without the Santosh activity. So is there Santosh? Because there is enlightened activities. Well, I don't know really
When
enlightened.
become the activity, there is no santosh.
If there's no activity, there's no Santosh. I agree. If there's no mind and body, there's no Santosh. Right? So without your mind and body, there's no Santosh.
Yes,
But if there's your mind and body, is there Santosh?
it appears to be.
Is there? Appearances can be deceptive. Is there? Good.
In order for an activity to be done,
Yes.
there should be some sort of being that is doing that activity.
Okay.
It cannot portray itself by its own.
Okay.
So there has to be an enlightened person
Mm-hmm.
to do an enlightened action. Action cannot be portrayed by itself.
So in other words, you don't have actions floating around in space. Aha. Aha. There needs to be someone who volitionally engages in those actions. Wise action. At least you need some wisdom, right?
So if that is the case, there has to be a being in order to have.
There has to be a being.
So.
There has to be a being.
So the teachings of Vajrayana,
Yes.
Buddha was given in a different manifestation.
Yeah, the Buddha in the Vajrayana or Tantric teachings, the Buddha manifested with a different appearance.
So what is it? How do we define this being in order to have an action?
How do we define that being? All right, Ram, I think I want to make a suggestion because it's so difficult to understand an enlightened being and then trying to understand emptiness of the enlightened being, so hard. How about we move away from enlightened beings and just take ordinary beings first, right? Okay, so, right, it's just so difficult. It's so hard to comprehend a Buddha. So, would you agree there is no Ram, but there are Ram actions? There are only Ram actions. Would you agree? There's no Ram, but there are only Ram's actions. Keeping in mind, what's your name? Rotem. Keeping in mind what Rotem said, saying that, what did she say? There are no actions floating in space. So someone needs to perform the actions.
But there is a state where in modern this thing, so-called flow.
Flow.
We are not there, but just this.
It just flows. Yeah, but before it flows, you need to make it flow. You need to turn on the tap before the water, right? They need to have volition. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. No, it's good. It's good. These thoughts you're going through, it's not easy. But just to challenge you a little bit, we hear these statements, and it's really difficult. And this is one of the most difficult topics there is. And so initially we're just floating with our ideas a little bit. Please.
I would say that the statement is true. There is no enlightened being, because if the being is enlightened, so everything is impermanent, so everything is moving. So the being is performing actions, and it's conscious about all the actions. So it's an activity, the being.
Mm-hmm. But there's no being. So there's only activity in your case, and you don't exist. Is that right? Because if the enlightened being doesn't exist, and there's only impermanent actions, I could say the same about you, couldn't I?
I'm the activity.
You're the activity.
But I'm conscious about what I'm doing. The enlightened being is conscious of everything. So it's like the activity is.
So you're unconscious. Who is this you who is unconscious? There's no one unconscious because you're not there. There's only this unconscious activity. But anyway, no. I'm saying in this kind of debate, it's easy for me to debate it. It's much harder to find an answer. Okay, so let's meditate on it. But before we do that, we'll have a break. Okay, we'll have 15 minutes is enough. Okay. 15 minutes. Who's the person who rings the bell? Please do it 5 minutes. Oh, great. 5 minutes before the 15 minutes out. Thank you. And you can always come